Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I still remember that night very clearly, the night Sarah disappeared. We had just finished the university year, and the whole group decided to go to the Rusty Lantern on the outskirts of Brookhaven to celebrate. It was the kind of bar deep in the woods, with a gravel parking lot and an old wooden sign flickering in the rain. Me, Sarah, Josh, and Megan, 4 best friends since freshman year. The rain started falling at 10:30 p.m. Sarah was the one who suggested staying for one more drink, while I wanted to leave. "It's early," she said, her voice lost in the sound of country music. She wore a brown leather jacket, her hair pulled up, smiling so brightly you couldn't refuse. We left the bar at 11:45. Sarah said she would walk a bit to sober up, then grab a ride home. I remember saying, "It's late, let me take you." She shook her head, smiling. "I'll be fine. Nothing ever happens in Brookhaven." That was the last time I saw her. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment downtown and saw 4 missed calls from Sarah's mother. A chill ran down my spine. Sarah hadn't come home. At first, we thought she'd slept over at someone's place or her phone had died. But by the afternoon, the local police got involved. They found her purse near the Old Creek Bridge, less than 2 miles from the bar. Inside were her wallet, keys, and a phone with a shattered screen. There were no signs of a struggle. When the police asked, I told the truth. I was the last person to talk to her. They took my statement and let me go. But since then, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how Sarah smiled, about the rain that night, and the idea that she walked alone on that dark, unlit road drove me mad. 3 days later, the town of Brookhaven started buzzing. Police searched the entire forest around the bridge, bringing in sniffer dogs. News reports appeared on TV showing Sarah's picture, 23 years old, dark blonde hair, 5'6" tall. People started talking. Some said she was kidnapped. Others said she had an accident. I went to the station every day asking for updates, but they just shook their heads. One officer named Miller told me, "Don't obsess, kid. Maybe she just left on her own." But I knew Sarah would never leave without telling anyone. She once told me she was afraid of the dark, even afraid of the woods. On the 6th day after she went missing, a fisherman found a woman's shoe floating on the river. About 4 miles from the Old Creek Bridge, the color and size matched Sarah's shoe. The next day, the search team found her body trapped between 2 rocks. The news spread through Brookhaven like a toxic wind. The police's initial conclusion: death by drowning. No clear signs of violence. But I knew something was wrong. Sarah would never walk along that river on a rainy night. 3 days later, the preliminary forensic report showed bruises on her neck. Everything changed after that. The lead investigator was Eleanor Brooks, a woman in her 40s with cold eyes and a concise way of speaking. She came to the bar, got the guest list for that night, and reviewed the security camera footage. That's when I was called in for the second time. In the video, Sarah appeared at 9:17 p.m., sitting with us. At 11:42, she stood up to leave, walking through the back door. A minute later, a man wearing a black baseball cap left in the same direction. The image was blurry, but Ms. Brooks said he was Eddie Nolan, the bar's security guard. I remembered. Yes, I had seen Eddie. He was tall, brusque, and often lingered near our table. Sarah said he was a bit creepy, but didn't pay him much mind. The police went to Eddie's house that same evening. He claimed he only went out for a smoke, then drove home in his truck. There were no other witnesses. They held him for 2 days, then released him. Lack of evidence, but I couldn't stop. I started investigating on my own. I went to the bar, asked the staff, and checked the parking lot that night. A waitress said she saw Sarah arguing with someone in the back lot, right before she disappeared. "It looked like a man in a dark jacket," she said. I reported it to Inspector Brooks. She nodded, then told me to let the police handle the rest. 2 weeks passed. No one was arrested. I started to think this case would be forgotten, until one Wednesday morning, when I received an anonymous text message. "If you want to know what really happened to Sarah, come to the truck stop west of Brookhaven tonight, alone." I didn't tell anyone, but I went. The truck stop was abandoned. rain tapping on the rusty tin roof. I waited for nearly half an hour. Then an old pickup truck appeared from a distance. The person who stepped out was Josh, my best friend who was at the bar that night. "I didn't know you were the one who texted," I said. "I wasn't," he replied, his voice shaking. "But I think I know who did it." Josh recounted that a few days after Sarah disappeared, Eddie had come to him, demanding he delete an old camera video on his phone because it might be misleading. He refused, and since then he had been threatened. "What did the video show?" I asked. "Sarah, in the back parking lot. Eddie was grabbing her arm. She was trying to pull away." Josh opened his phone and showed me. The image was blurry, but it was clear Sarah was being held back. I held my breath. We took the video to the police the very next morning. Inspector Brooks watched it, remained silent for a few seconds, then said only one sentence: "That's enough." Police raided Eddie's house that afternoon. He tried to flee but was caught at the edge of town. In his car, they found a woman's leather jacket with bloodstains and a piece of nylon cord that matched the bruises on Sarah's neck. He confessed that night. Sarah went out to the parking lot alone and he followed. He invited her for another drink. She refused and he got angry. She resisted and he strangled her. Panicked, he dragged the body to the river, hoping the rain would wash away all traces. He said, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to shut up." The trial took place 3 months later. I sat in the front row watching Eddie in handcuffs. His face was emotionless, as if the whole thing had nothing to do with him. When the jury pronounced guilty, I didn't feel relief, just emptiness. Sarah was gone. Justice might have been served, but it didn't bring her back. A year passed. I still live in Brookhaven, even though many people have left. Occasionally, I pass the old creek bridge, where people place small bouquets of flowers for her. Some days it rains again, just like that night. I stand there watching the water flow, thinking about the small things that led to the tragedy. A refusal, a moment of anger, an irreparable mistake. The police said that without Josh's video, the case might have been dismissed forever. That sends a shiver down my spine, because all of us were there, just a few meters away, and no one knew our friend was dying. In the parking lot, sometimes I hear Sarah's voice in my head, saying, "I'll be fine." That ordinary phrase is now the deepest cut. I'm telling this story not to torment anyone, but to remind myself that tragedies always begin with very human things. Complacency, trust, and a little bit of innocence. That last night in Brookhaven took away a friend and left an unfillable void in me. But it also made me understand, sometimes, justice is not the cheer after the verdict, but the moment you dare to face what was lost and say that, at least the truth is known. I arrived in that small town at the end of summer, when the sun still cast blindingly bright streaks onto the road, but the wind from the hills already carried the chill that signaled autumn was approaching. The town was called Brook Hollow, nestled between pine forests and winding red dirt roads that led out to the highway. I was here for a short assignment, to take documentary photographs for a local magazine, doing an article on unsolved missing person cases. The editorial office wanted an outsider, someone unaffected by rumors or prejudice, and I was the one chosen. The hotel where I was staying was on the main road, with only 8 rooms. The owner was an older woman named Margaret. She greeted me with a polite smile but a guarded look in her eyes. When I mentioned the purpose of my trip, she simply nodded, then warned me to limit going out at night because the forest to the north was not safe. I thought she was just trying to frighten a stranger, so I just smiled it off. The first disappearance happened 3 years ago. A young woman, a gas station attendant, vanished on her way home after the night shift. Her car was found by the roadside, doors locked, her phone still in the seat pocket. The police found no signs of a struggle. A year later, a local man went missing while hunting in the woods. Then another person, a tourist, also disappeared while camping near the lake. 3 incidents, the same area, no evidence, no bodies. I had read the files, but what brought me here was the detail about the time gap between the cases. They occurred almost on the same day, exactly 1 year apart. And tomorrow would be the 4th anniversary of the first case. I started taking photos early in the morning. The town was quiet, almost deserted. The general store, the coffee shop, the barber. Everything was old but clean, as if time had stopped. When I asked the residents about the disappearances, most avoided the subject. Some just shook their heads quietly. Others turned away without speaking. Only an old man sitting on his porch agreed to say a few words. He said the last person who went missing had stopped at the pub near the edge of the woods. After that, no one ever saw him again. In the afternoon, I walked out to that forest. The path leading in was covered in dry leaves and smelled of pine sap. I brought my camera, notes, and a small flashlight. Light filtered through the canopy, casting patchy, faded yellow spots onto the ground. In the middle of the forest was a clearing, where search parties had once set up camp. Now only a few torn tarps and faint tire tracks remained. I took a few shots, intending to leave, when I noticed a small wooden cabin further away, half submerged in the shadows of the woods. The door was closed, but faint smoke drifted from the chimney. I approached, knocked, but no one answered. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps on the wooden floor inside. I stopped, peered through the crack in the door, and only saw the weak glow of an oil lamp. I waited for a while longer, then left. That evening, back in my room, I reviewed the photos I had taken. In one picture, far beyond the trees, I saw a faint human silhouette, as if someone was standing and looking towards me. It might have just been a trick of the light, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. I zoomed in, but the image remained blurry. I turned off the computer, telling myself I would come back tomorrow. Night fell, and Brook Hollow was almost enveloped in silence. I lay listening to the wind whistling through the window, thinking about the wooden cabin. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise, like wheels rolling over gravel outside the yard. I looked through the curtain and saw headlights flash across the road. An old truck stopped at the junction. The driver opened the door, stepped out, and then vanished into the darkness. I didn't know why I felt so uneasy. I tried to go back to sleep, but by morning, my mind was still spinning with that image. The next day, I went to the police station. A young officer told me that the forest was private property, and I shouldn't go near it. I asked about the wooden cabin. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Someone used to live there but had left many years ago." When I mentioned the smoke from the chimney last night, he just fell silent. Finally, he advised me that if I intended to investigate, I should leave town before dark. I didn't heed his advice. In the afternoon, I rented a small truck and returned to the forest. I stopped at the same spot, grabbed my camera and flashlight, and headed straight for the cabin. The door was still closed, but this time I tried to push it gently. The door swung open. Inside, it was dark and damp, with the smell of rusted iron. Light from the window streamed in, illuminating objects covered in dust. In the middle of the room was a wooden table, with a stack of messy papers on it. I carefully opened them. They were all photographs. Photos of the people I had read about in the files. The gas station girl, the hunter, the tourist. All three were photographed from a distance, seemingly unaware they were being watched. I flipped further. There was another photo taken outside the hotel where I was staying, and the person in the photo was me. The picture was taken last night, right when I looked through the curtain. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't hear anything, but I had the feeling someone was very close. I looked around and saw a small, ajar door at the back of the cabin. I walked over, opened it, and found a stairwell leading down to the basement. The air down below was heavy with the smell of dampness and rust. I shone my flashlight down and saw wooden crates, some rusty tools, and a board hanging on the wall covered with pinned photos. On it was a map of the town, with red lines connecting one place to another. A small handwritten note read, "Next year." I looked closer and saw a faint line at the bottom. The first Wednesday of September. Today was that day. I heard footsteps above, very slow. I turned off my flashlight, trying to stay silent. The basement door closed, and the darkness swallowed the remaining light. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding wildly. The footsteps moved around the room, then stopped right above me. I tried not to breathe loudly. After a long moment, the door opened again. The footsteps left. I waited a few more minutes before daring to crawl up. The room was empty, but the main door was wide open. Outside, dusk was setting in. I rushed out, running straight toward the town. When I got near the hotel, I saw the truck parked on the opposite side of the road. The driver was sitting in the cabin, looking in my direction. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, Then the engine started, and the truck turned and drove back into the forest. I didn't follow. I knew I had just escaped something I shouldn't name. The next morning I left Brook Hollow. No one asked me why. Margaret just handed me my room key and wished me good luck. As my car drove out of town, I looked in the rearview mirror. The town's welcome sign gradually disappeared, and I had the feeling that a place called Brook Hollow had never existed on the map. A week later, I sent all the photos and notes to the editorial office. They did not publish the article. The editor merely said the file had been removed from the catalog due to insufficient verification. I asked who removed it, but he didn't know. When I reopened the photo folder on my computer, all the files were gone. Instead, there was only one left. The picture I took of the wooden cabin. On the window, faint in the light, was the shape of a person standing and looking out. I moved house, changed my phone number, and tried to forget the town. But every year, when September comes, I receive an anonymous postcard. On the postcard is a picture of a small road leading into a forest, with a handwritten message in red ink below. Next year. I have never returned to Brook Hollow, and perhaps I never will dare to. But sometimes, in the silent nights, I still think about the eyes of that driver, and wonder if he is standing somewhere out there, waiting for my turn to disappear from this world. I was the last person to see Emily alive. That evening, the rain was pouring down, the kind of biting cold rain you get in December in northern Oregon. I was on duty at the only gas station open all night, off Highway 26, a long, narrow, and lonely road connecting the pine forests and the Coast Range Mountains. We rarely had customers at that hour, except for a few long-haul truck drivers or people who got lost because their GPS lost signal in the woods. Around 11 p.m., Emily's silver Honda Civic pulled in. She stepped out of the car, soaking wet, wearing a dark blue jacket with mud on the hem. I remember clearly because she smiled at me, the kind of polite smile people give strangers. But in her eyes, there was something. Tired, bewildered. "Do you have a public phone?" she asked. "Right around the corner," I replied, pointing to the old phone booth against the brick wall. She put a coin into the machine and dialed a number. I heard the phone ringing from inside the booth, then she fell silent. After a while, Emily returned to the counter, nodded thanks, and asked for directions to Tillamook. I showed her the way, warning her that the road through the forest would be winding, slippery, and it was best to wait until morning. She smiled, said she didn't want to wait. I didn't know that was the last time I would see her. The next morning, when my shift ended, the police were all around the station. A deputy asked me if I had seen anyone pass by the night before. I told him about the girl driving the silver Honda. He immediately wrote down everything I said. Her car, they said, was found about 6 miles from the gas station, overturned by the roadside, headlights still on, the car door wide open. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just her phone dropped in the mud and a pair of shoes left on the passenger seat. Emily had vanished, as if she dissolved into the rain. I vividly remember the scene. It was still raining. Officers wading through the mud looking for clues. Sniffer dogs sniffing through the cold, damp forest. And I stood watching, feeling that something was wrong but unable to name it. That evening, at home, I turned on the TV. The news showed her picture, Emily Carter, 27, missing while driving home after a conference in Portland. That face was the faint smile from last night, but now it was framed in an urgent news bulletin. I didn't know why my heart tightened. Maybe because she was the last person to speak to me, or because of the way she looked into the darkness before leaving, as if she knew something was waiting. In the following days, I became the key witness. The police called me to the station, asking again and again, "Did you see anyone with her? Was anyone following her? Did she seem scared?" I answered all their questions, but they found nothing. They checked her phone signal. Emily's last call lasted exactly 23 seconds. No one answered. It was just an unregistered, unfamiliar number. A week later, the rain still hadn't stopped. I started dreaming of her, standing outside the gas station door, soaking wet, looking inside. I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing the wind howling through the metal roof. imagining it was her knocking on the door. On the 8th night, I decided to drive to the scene, where the Honda was found. The road was morbidly empty. Mud and broken branches covered the road surface. I turned on my headlights, shining through the mist, seeing only the dark forest. When I reached the curve where her car had flipped, I stopped. A bent warning sign was dented. Below it was a faint tire mark on the asphalt, disappearing into the wet grass. I got out of the car, rain hitting my face. Something urged me to go into the woods. Under the flashlight beam, the ground was full of old boot prints and dog paw prints, likely from the search team. But next to them, I noticed a smaller, rounder, deeper print in the mud, like a bare footprint. I bent down. The print led deep into the forest. I don't know why, but I followed it. The sound of the rain drowned out all other noise. The Oregon forest at night is something not meant for humans. Dark, damp, and dense with the smell of earth. I walked about 100 meters when I saw a piece of blue fabric caught on a branch. When I touched it, I realized it was the hem of her jacket. I backed away, my heart pounding. Just then, my flashlight beam swept over a small object on the ground. A star-shaped keychain, with the letter E on it. I was about to call the police, but in that moment I heard something behind me. Not loud, just the rustle of dry leaves. I turned around but saw no one, only the thick curtain of rain falling through the light beam. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. For the next 10 minutes I stood there, hesitating between going further or going back. Finally, I chose to return to my car. I thought, I'm just a witness, not a hunter. On the way back, I felt like someone was following me, a soft, steady pace, stopping whenever I stopped. I turned back 3 times, saw nothing. By the time I reached the road, I was practically running. The next morning, I told the deputy about it. He listened, just nodded, then said, "We searched that whole area, buddy. Nothing there." I told him about the piece of jacket, the keychain. He frowned. "We didn't find anything, you must have mistaken it." I stayed silent. But I knew for sure what I had seen. 2 months passed. The Emily Carter story gradually disappeared from the news. People said she ran away. Some said she committed suicide. Some even said she faked her disappearance to escape debt. I knew they were all wrong. One late February evening, as the snow began to fall, I was wiping down the gas station counter when a strange man walked in. He wore a black leather jacket, a baseball cap, and had cold gray eyes. He asked me if I still had the security tape from the night Emily visited. I said no, the police had taken it. He nodded and left. I went outside to watch him, but he didn't head toward the parking lot. He walked along the path leading into the forest. I don't know why I did it, but I turned off the lights, grabbed my flashlight, and followed. His footsteps were clearly marked in the snow. I kept my distance, listening to the wind whistling through the pine trees. After a few minutes, he stopped in front of an old wooden cabin, seemingly abandoned for a long time. I hid behind a tree, watching him open the door with a private key. A faint yellow light spilled out from inside. I tried to listen, but there was only the sound of the wind and the creaking of the wooden floorboards. A while later, he came out to smoke. I sneaked closer, and when the light from inside hit his face, my heart nearly stopped. It was the deputy. I backed away, breathing heavily. The pieces clicked in my mind. He was always the first on the scene, always dismissed the details I mentioned, and he was the one who held all the evidence. I didn't know what Emily had discovered, but she probably made a phone call to someone, perhaps him, and then disappeared. I left the forest, not daring to look back. 2 days later, I received an unaddressed envelope at the gas station. Inside was a photo, a picture of the Honda overturned by the road, and reflected in the car's rearview mirror was my face, standing at the counter, looking out. On the back of the photo was just a handwritten line. "You saw it too, didn't you?" I threw the envelope in the trash, but I couldn't sleep for the whole following week. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily standing in the forest, soaking wet, pointing toward the wooden cabin. March came, and the rain returned. I still worked, still pumped gas for passing strangers, still looked out at the dark road leading into the forest. Sometimes I wondered, did I just imagine everything because of my obsession? Maybe the deputy was innocent. Maybe Emily truly wanted to disappear. But then one morning, as I arrived for my shift, I saw the police blocking the road. People said someone found a burned-out cabin in the woods, with the remains of at least 2 people inside. I didn't ask, just looked at the swirling black smoke, hearing the rain of that night echoing in my head. That evening, I asked for time off early and drove toward the coast. The road was empty, just me and the sound of the windshield wipers. I thought about Emily, about the look in her eyes when she asked for directions, about how she disappeared from this world without anyone believing human agency was involved. As I passed the curve where the Honda had once flipped, I slowed down. My headlights swept across the bent sign, and in that moment, I swore I saw a figure standing by the roadside, wet hair, wearing a dark blue jacket. I slammed on the brakes, but when the car stopped, no one was there. Just the rain. I left Oregon a month later. The police never released the identity of the remains in the cabin, only saying it was an accidental fire. The deputy transferred jobs. Emily Carter's case was closed. Sometimes on rainy nights, I still have that dream. In the dream, I'm standing at the gas station, the yellow light shining on the wet glass. The door opens and Emily walks in, smiling like the first day. She asks, "Do you have a public phone?" I point to the corner of the wall and she walks away again, slowly, disappearing into the darkness. Every time I wake up, I remember that in real life, that phone booth was dismantled last year, after I quit my job. But in my dream, it still stands there, faintly lit in the endless rain, like a place where everything remains unchanged. I'm not telling all this to seek belief. I just want to record it, before the memory fades like rainwater on glass. Some nights I ask myself, if I had tried harder to persuade her to stay that night, if I had said something different, would she still be alive? I don't know. I only know that sometimes disappearances don't happen because people take the wrong turn, but because they meet the wrong person. On the right rainy night, and I was standing there, witnessing it happen, helpless like the gatekeeper for the darkness to step in. I never thought that a temporary job could change the rest of my life. I arrived in the town of Hollow Creek at the beginning of autumn, when the maple trees began to shed their leaves, staining the road into town with deep red. I rented a small room behind the diner, owned by a woman named Greta, who looked at me with a scrutinizing gaze but still rented the room, as long as I paid on time. I am a freelance journalist who used to write for several local newspapers in the East, mainly about unsolved missing person cases. I came here for one such case, a girl named Amelia Ross, 22 years old, who vanished one June night on her way home from the gas station. No one saw her afterward. The police assumed she ran away, while her mother insisted her daughter had been abducted. I came to Hollow Creek to write an investigative piece, but the longer I stayed, the more I felt I was wading into something darker than any headline I had ever written. The town was small, with just over 2,000 residents, surrounded by pine forests and winding dirt roads leading to abandoned farms. People here had a way of avoiding eye contact whenever I mentioned Amelia's name. They didn't refuse to talk, they just changed the subject, as if that name could cause something to return. I started taking notes on the last places Amelia had been. According to the police, that evening she stopped at Hollow Creek Gas, bought coffee and cigarettes. The security camera recorded her leaving at 9:17 p.m., driving a silver Ford Focus toward the road leading into the forest. No one saw her again. I went to the gas station at the exact same time during my first week, just to feel the atmosphere. The station owner, an old man named Walter, about 50, said he remembered that day very clearly. She didn't look worried, he said, his eyes distant, just a bit rushed. I asked if anyone else came after her. He shook his head. But I noticed he avoided eye contact. I rented an old pickup truck and drove along the road Amelia had taken. After a few miles, I saw a small sign that read, Old Sawmill Road, a dirt track leading into the woods. The grass was overgrown, and tires had left deep prints in the wet mud. I stopped at the bend where, according to reports, police found Amelia's bracelet. A silver bracelet with the letter R engraved on the face. I saw nothing but the canopy swaying slightly in the wind and the pungent smell of pine sap. In the following days, I went to the town library. The librarian was a young woman named Lillian, with brown hair pulled up, her eyes evasive when I asked about Amelia. But as I left, she slipped a small piece of paper into my hand. It contained only a few words. Check Ross house, 11 p.m. I didn't understand, but that evening I went to the Ross family home on the outskirts. The old house had a weak light spilling out from the second floor. I parked far away and walked closer. In the yard, I saw the silhouette of a woman, probably Amelia's mother, sitting on a wooden chair, staring into space. I didn't intend to startle her, only to say a few words. But as I approached, she whispered without looking at me, "He's still here." Before I could ask, she turned her face away, walked into the house, and the door slowly closed. I stood there in the darkness, feeling a shiver at the way she spoke, as if it wasn't a lament but a warning. I started looking into Amelia's ex-boyfriend, a guy named Mark Haynes who worked at the town's old sawmill. He had a history of violence, once arrested for a bar disturbance but released due to lack of evidence. When I went to the sawmill, I found only an abandoned building, rusty doors, and old tire tracks pressed into the ground. I turned on my flashlight and walked in. Inside, it smelled of mold and rotting wood. I found a woman's jacket draped over a chair, covered in dust, but still carrying a faint scent of perfume. I took a picture with my camera and left. As I returned to my car, I realized someone had been standing at the edge of the woods watching me. A tall silhouette, unmoving. When I turned my light in that direction, he vanished. I sent the photo and information to my former editor, asking him to check for clues. He messaged back that the jacket was a brand Amelia often wore, but no one knew why it was there. That night I couldn't sleep. From my boarding house window, I saw the road was empty, but the street light suddenly flickered, then went out for a few seconds. I heard footsteps behind the thin wall, like someone walking down the hallway. I opened the door, only to find the wind blowing in. The next day, Greta told me someone had asked for me the previous evening, saying they were an old friend. I didn't know anyone here. When I asked for the name, she said the person didn't leave one. I began to feel uneasy. I decided to return to the forest near Old Sawmill Road at night. This time I brought an infrared camera. I walked along the muddy path, my car headlights illuminating the patchy tree trunks. After about an hour, I discovered an old concrete foundation, possibly the remains of a warehouse. As I approached, I noticed a small metal door, rusty, half covered by dirt. I bent down and pulled hard. The door swung open, revealing a narrow passage leading downwards. I shone my light, seeing rickety steps, the air damp and cold. Below was a small room, concrete walls soaked with water. In the middle of the room was a wooden table, and on it, a notebook. I opened it, seeing scribbled handwriting. "No one believes me. He follows me every night." The next page had different handwriting, bolder and more erratic. "If you tell, I'll bury you here." I took a picture and closed the notebook. When I looked up, I saw car lights flash through the crack above the door. Someone had just arrived. I turned off my light and pressed myself into a corner. I heard the metal door close. Darkness engulfed everything. I heard heavy footsteps above, then silence. I stood still for hours, counting every breath. When I dared to come up, no one was there. Outside, it was starting to rain. I drove straight back to town, sending the photos and coordinates to the police chief. The next morning, he came to see me, asking if I had been in that area. I said yes. He just looked at me, coldly saying that the place was private property, sealed off last year. He advised me to leave town because things here are not for outsiders. I left his office feeling empty inside. I returned to my room, finding the window wide open, even though I had locked it this morning. On the table, someone had placed a small note hastily written in blue ink. "You should stop." No signature. I went to find Greta, but she said no one had entered my room. I thought about it all night. I could leave, write the article about the secrets buried in Hollow Creek from afar, safe and vague. But what was in the notebook? Those words made it impossible for me to ignore. I sought out Lillian at the library again. She looked at me, seeming to have anticipated my arrival. I told her about the basement, about the notebook. She was silent for a long time, then quietly said, "Mark used to work in that area. He lived nearby in the old wooden cabin by the lake, but the police never searched it." I asked why. She didn't answer. That evening, I drove to the lake. The road was empty, with only the moonlight reflecting on the water. The wooden cabin stood alone, the door unlocked. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. On the table, I found an upside-down picture frame. I flipped it over, a photo of Amelia. Underneath were an old set of keys and a handwritten note. "I'm sorry." I recognized the handwriting as similar to the one in the basement notebook. As I turned around, I heard a sound behind me. A man was standing at the door, his face partially obscured in the darkness. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, his eyes dull and tired. I recognized him as Mark, though older and more gaunt than the image I had seen. He didn't attack, just asked in a hoarse voice, "What are you looking for here?" I told him the truth, that I wanted to know what happened. He sat down on a chair, lowering his head. "I didn't kill her," he said slowly. "She ran away. I just tried to hide it." I asked where he hid it. He didn't answer, just looked out the window where the wind stirred the lake's surface. I left there without another word. The next morning, I reported the cabin and what I found to the police. They went, but no one saw Mark again. The cabin was empty, as if no one had ever lived there. Police excavated the area around the lake, and 3 days later, they found Amelia's body shallowly buried near an old tree, still wearing the silver bracelet. My article was never published. The editor said there was no evidence for Mark's statement, and that the police concluded it was an accident. But I knew it wasn't. I knew because the night before I left town, I returned to the lake one last time. On the wooden table where I had seen the "I'm sorry" note, there was a new line added. I lied. I left Hollow Creek as dawn broke. The road was misty, and the old Sawmill Road sign receded in my rearview mirror. I survived. But since then, whenever I write about missing person cases, I always ask myself, how many people were buried in silence, and how many perpetrators are still living among us, carrying an unheard confession. Hollow Creek still doesn't appear on tourist maps, but if you drive by and see the rusty sign pointing toward the forest, remember that some roads don't lead anywhere. They just lead you deeper into your own darkness. I drove along the interstate highway, the road stretching like a silver streak in the night. Headlights slid past old signs, pitch-black rows of trees and steep curves winding into the forest. I was heading to a small town called Marlowe's End, where an old friend of mine, Daniel, had disappeared 3 months earlier. The police called it a voluntary disappearance. His family believed he had abandoned everything, but I knew Daniel wasn't that type of person. He hated change, hated leaving familiar places. He once told me, "If I disappear one day, it means something forced me to." When I arrived, it wasn't yet dawn. Marlowe's End was shrouded in fog, with narrow streets, stone sidewalks, and wooden houses packed closely together. The scene looked frozen in some decade from the middle of the last century. I rented a room at a motel outside of town. The manager was a middle-aged woman with a hoarse voice and deep-set eyes. She asked how long I planned to stay. I said only a few days. She nodded, threw the key onto the counter, and didn't ask anything more. The next morning, I started investigating. Daniel had come here to write an article about the disappearances around Lake Verdon. He told me the place held something wrong, but didn't elaborate. I went to the only coffee shop in town, ordered a strong black cup, and asked the waitress about Daniel. The young girl avoided eye contact, saying she didn't know. As I left, I saw her whispering something to the man behind the counter. That man looked after me, his eyes cold as steel. I drove to Lake Verdon. The dirt road leading into the forest was narrow and full of potholes. The lake water was calm, murky green, reflecting the gray sky. There were a few small canoes moored near the shore, and an old wooden cabin, doors locked, walls covered in moss. I recognized this as the place Daniel had rented. The police had checked it but found nothing unusual. I tried looking around. In the shed behind the house, there was a pile of fresh black ash, perhaps the remnants of a bonfire. In the ashes, I found a brass lighter, engraved with the letter D. I knew for sure it was Daniel's. He always carried it, even though he didn't smoke. I took photos, took notes, and returned to town. That evening, I noticed I was being followed. As I left the supermarket, I caught a glimpse of the gray truck that had been parked near the motel since yesterday. When I turned onto another street, the truck changed direction too. I stopped at a gas station, pretending to make a call, and looked through the mirror. The truck had disappeared. But when I returned to the motel, I saw fresh tire tracks on the damp ground right in front of my room door. I couldn't sleep that night. I opened my laptop to review the notes Daniel had sent before he disappeared. In the last folder, there was a file he named Verdant Truth. The file was empty. There was only one line in the metadata, last modified by unknown. I tried to recover an older version, but there was nothing. When I looked in the mirror, I realized my jacket still had some wet mud on it, and a small piece of paper had fallen out of the pocket. It was a flyer for the Crossing Bar, a pub near the lake. On the back was a scrawled handwritten message. They know. The next day I went there. The pub was isolated, with only a few men sitting at the counter, the light murky yellow and the smell of stale beer. I asked the bartender about Daniel. He stopped pouring, looked at me for a long time, then said, "He came here, drank alone, talked about the missing people, asked too many questions. I asked who they were. He remained silent. As I walked out, he called out without looking at me, 'If you're smart, you'll leave before dark.' I didn't listen. I drove around the lake area. Finally, I found an old, overgrown trail leading up the northern hill. This path wasn't on the map. I continued on foot until I reached a barbed wire fence, behind which were rows of old containers and a low, unmarked concrete building. There were cameras mounted around, but no guards. It felt like this place was hidden from the rest of the town. I heard a faint noise behind me. A man in a security uniform appeared, asking what I was doing there. I said I was lost. He didn't believe me, demanding I leave. As I returned to my car, I saw him still standing there watching until I was completely out of sight. In the evening, I called the police chief's number listed in Daniel's records. A man answered, saying he no longer worked there. I asked who replaced him. He paused, then said quietly, "No one. Don't look anymore." Then he hung up. I felt something strange surrounding me, as if everyone knew something I wasn't allowed to understand. That night, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, no one was standing there. On the ground was a brown envelope. Inside was a photo of Daniel, taken in front of the wooden cabin by the lake. On the back was a line, "He saw," nothing else. I left town the next morning, but as I drove out of the Marlowe's End area, I saw the gray truck appear in my mirror again. I sped up. After more than 2 hours, it disappeared. I stopped at a highway gas station to check my phone. All the photos, notes, and backup files I had saved about Lake Verdant were gone. Only the picture of Daniel's lighter remained. I tried to log into his email account, but the password had been changed. I returned to the city, trying to continue my life, but I couldn't. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at my house, no sender listed. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook, Daniel's. The first page had only one line written in pencil. "They don't kill people. They erase them." The rest were fragmented notes about the missing people, about a secret facility beneath the lake. He wrote that the place used to be a private laboratory, testing a cognitive identity project, a form of behavioral identification program designed to recognize people by their behavior instead of their faces. The project was halted due to ethical issues, but some personnel continued the research in Marlowe's End. He wrote, "They want to erase people, not kill them. They want to see how much a human can be redefined." I tried to contact anyone who might know about that project. No one answered. The people I asked after a few days went silent, their accounts disappearing. I realized someone was cleaning up all traces related to Marlowe's End. I once thought about sending everything to the press, but then I was afraid. Some things should not be made public when you can't protect yourself. I kept the notebook in a locked cabinet. Sometimes late at night, I opened it and reread it. Some pages had faint writing, but I noticed Daniel's handwriting gradually changing. His script, which was usually straight and clear, became crooked, scrawled like that of another person. The last page had only 2 words written boldly, tremblingly. "Don't look, I am still alive. I have left the country, taking the notebook and the brass lighter with me. Every time the lighter flares, I think of Daniel and the truth he tried to tell me. I don't know who they are, and I'm not sure what erasing people means, but I believe there are people or organizations who know how to make someone vanish without killing them. They just need to make the world forget that person ever existed." Sometimes I open the map again, looking at the location of Lake Verdant. The map application no longer shows the town of Marlowe's End. When I try to search, the result is only an empty forest area. No roads, no lake. It's as if the place never existed. But I still keep the picture of the lighter, and in the photo, in the faint reflection on the lake surface, there is a silhouette of someone standing. Not Daniel. And I know, even though I have run very far, they are still watching.